Home, a place where you should feel safe, where the walls shield you from the chaos outside. It's where you can relax, let your guard down, and trust that the people around you mean no harm. But what happens when the danger doesn't come from far away? What happens when it's right next door? Today, we're sharing 3 chilling stories of sinister neighbors, accounts that will make you question how well you really know the people who live closest to you. In our first story, a man reflects on his neighbor, Charles, a father devastated by the disappearance of his teenage son. But over time, Charles's strange behavior and a late-night digging session in the backyard hint at a dark secret buried just below the surface, literally. Next, we'll hear from a teenager whose neighbors weren't just odd, they were dangerous. 2 troubled young men escalated their behavior from pranks to midnight threats, forcing his family into a terrifying situation that would haunt them long after they left. And finally, we'll uncover a story of a noise complaint that spiraled into a nightmare. A young man thought his loud neighbors were his biggest problem until he woke up in the middle of the night to find one of them crouched at the foot of his bed. These true accounts reveal the hidden darkness that can lurk behind even the most normal-looking home. Sometimes, the scariest dangers aren't far away, they're right outside your door. So grab a seat, turn on a light, and prepare yourself. By the end of this video, you'll think twice about what might be happening just beyond your walls. When the narrator first met Charles and Kathy, they seemed like the perfect suburban couple. Friendly, outgoing, and always eager to chat over the fence, they were the kind of neighbors everyone wanted. But everything changed the day Charles told the narrator about their son. Their 14-year-old son had disappeared 5 years earlier. Charles explained the details slowly, his voice breaking as he recounted how their boy had vanished on his way home from school one afternoon. No trace of him was ever found, and the tragedy left Charles and Kathy shattered. The narrator felt a pang of sympathy. It was hard to imagine the pain they must have endured. He began to notice how Kathy had grown more withdrawn, rarely leaving the house. Charles, on the other hand, had become jittery, always glancing around nervously during their conversation. Still, life went on, and the couple continued inviting the narrator over for barbecues. But beneath their friendly demeanor, something felt off. One summer afternoon, Charles knocked on the narrator's door, asking to borrow a shovel. It wasn't a strange request, neighbors help each other out all the time, but the way Charles fidgeted and avoided eye contact set off a small alarm in the narrator's mind. Later that evening, curiosity got the better of him. From his upstairs window, the narrator could see Charles in his backyard, digging furiously in the fading light. The hole was deep, and Charles's movements were frantic, almost desperate. "Need a hand?" the narrator called out. Charles jumped, startled, and stammered something about taking care of an old tree root. His tone was sharp, almost defensive. The narrator backed off, not wanting to press the issue. But as the sun set, he noticed something chilling, a large black garbage bag lying next to the hole. That night, the narrator couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, his thoughts drifted back to Charles and that mysterious bag. Was it trash? Yard waste? Or was it something far worse? The scene sent shivers down the narrator's spine, but he hesitated to intervene. What if it was nothing? What if he was overreacting? The next morning, the hole was gone, the backyard perfectly smoothed over as if nothing had ever happened. When the narrator tried to strike up a conversation, Charles brushed him off, muttering an excuse before hurrying inside. Days turned into weeks, and the atmosphere between the neighbors grew tense. Charles avoided the narrator entirely, and Kathy barely peeked out from behind the curtain. Then, one night, things took a terrifying turn. The narrator woke to a strange feeling, an unease that made his skin crawl. When he glanced toward the window, his blood ran cold. Charles was standing outside, staring directly at him. For what felt like an eternity, Charles didn't move. His face was blank, expressionless, almost inhuman in the moonlight. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. The narrator didn't sleep that night. He considered calling the police, but worried he had no evidence to justify his fears. Over time, Charles's behavior returned to normal, but the narrator couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had happened in that backyard. The narrator was 15 when his family moved to a quiet suburban neighborhood. It wasn't perfect, but the streets were clean, and the neighbors mostly kept to themselves. However, there was one house that stood out, the home of Eric and Todd. The two brothers were older teens, known for their troublemaking. Their parents were rarely around, and the boys had a reputation for being aggressive and unpredictable. "They're bad news," the narrator's parents warned. But curiosity got the better of him and his younger brother when Eric and Todd invited them over one weekend. Eric greeted them with a sly grin. "You guys wanna try shooting BB guns?" The narrator was hesitant, but his younger brother was eager. They followed Eric and Todd into the backyard, where several targets were set up. The brothers handed them what looked like BB gun, but something about the weight and appearance didn't sit right. "Are these real guns?" the narrator asked cautiously. Todd laughed. "Relax, they're just modified." But when Eric fired at one of the targets, the sharp crack of a real gunshot echoed through the air. The narrator's stomach dropped. "I'm not doing this," he said firmly, pulling his younger brother away. His refusal seemed to irritate Eric and Todd. "What, you think you're better than us?" Eric sneered. The narrator shook his head and left, dragging his brother along. As they walked away, he could feel their eyes burning into his back. The next few days were tense. Eric and Todd began acting hostile whenever they saw the brothers, glaring at them from across the street and muttering under their breath. One evening, a note was slipped under their front door. It was crudely written and chillingly direct. "Keep quiet, or else." The narrator's parents dismissed it as a prank, but he knew better. That night, as he lay in bed, he heard the faint creak of a door. Before he could react, he felt cold metal against his temple. Todd was standing over him, holding a gun. His voice was low and menacing. "You ever tell anyone about the guns, and your whole family's done." "Got it?" Frozen with fear, the narrator could only nod. Satisfied, Todd slipped back out the window he had used to enter the room. The experience left the narrator shaken, and he told no one, not even his brother. But Eric and Todd weren't done. Over the following weeks, the brothers escalated their behavior. They egged the narrator's house, keyed their car, and left more threatening notes. The narrator's younger brother became withdrawn, avoiding going outside altogether. The family tried to confront Eric and Todd's parents, but they were never home. One evening, while walking back from school, the narrator saw Eric following him. The older boy didn't say a word, just trailed him all the way home, his smirk never fading. It wasn't until the narrator's father caught Todd lurking near their property late at night that the family decided enough was enough. They packed up and moved within a month, leaving the neighborhood behind. The relief was immediate, but the scars remain. 4 years, the narrator couldn't sleep with the window open, and any loud noise outside made his heart race. Eric and Todd's threats may not have ended in violence, but the fear they instilled was enough to change the narrator's life forever. When the narrator moved into a small rental home in a lower-income neighborhood, he wasn't expecting perfection. The house was old but livable, and the neighbors kept to themselves, all except for the house next door. That house belonged to an elderly woman and her adult daughter. The daughter, who seemed to struggle with severe mental illness, often caused disturbances. Screams, erratic laughter, and loud banging echoed through the thin walls at all hours of the day and night. At first, the narrator tried to ignore it. "They're harmless," he told himself. But as the noise continued, his patience began to wear thin. One afternoon, after hours of hearing the daughter shout obscenities at no one in particular, the narrator decided to knock on their door. The mother answered, her face lined with exhaustion. "Can I help you?" "I just wanted to ask if you could keep the noise down," the narrator said, trying to sound polite. Her response was curt. "She's not well. You'll have to deal with it." Before he could reply, the door slammed shut. The noise didn't stop. It got worse. The daughter began screaming insults directly at the narrator, her voice cutting through the thin walls like a knife. He started spending less time at home, retreating to work or a friend's house just to get some peace. One night, the narrator woke to a strange noise. It wasn't the usual shouting or banging. It was a faint creaking, like someone walking through his house. His heart pounded as he reached for his phone, using the flashlight to scan the room. That's when he saw her. The woman from next door was crouched at the foot of his bed, her wild eyes reflecting the beam of light. She let out an ear-piercing scream, sending the narrator scrambling out of bed. He bolted downstairs, locking himself in the kitchen and calling the police. The officers arrived quickly and removed the woman from the house. She had entered through an unlocked window, though it was unclear how long she'd been inside. The mother apologized profusely but begged the narrator not to press charges, explaining that her daughter didn't understand what she was doing. Against his better judgment, he agreed. But the encounter left him shaken, and his fears weren't eased when the mother gave him a cold, hateful glare as the officers escorted her daughter away. The next day, the woman and her mother packed up and left without a word. But that night, as the narrator was locking up, he noticed something strange. A car parked across the street, its headlights off. Inside, he saw the caretaker glaring at his house. She stayed there for hours before finally driving away, leaving the narrator on edge. The following week, he broke his lease and moved, unwilling to risk another encounter. The experience taught him that danger doesn't always come from strangers or distant places. Sometimes, it's as close as the house next door.